been fired at with rubber bullets. My cameraman has been hit. We've also seen tear gas being used. Here we go, they're moving through again. This is exactly what it looks like. Exactly what it looks like. We're just staying safely.
Now they're...
Gosh.
You see
That's
what's
a photographer.
That's
going
the
on now.
member of the press.
Now there's just a lot of violence erupting.
Yeah, a lot of violence erupting indeed, and Prime Minister Scott Morrison has since directed Arthur Sinodonis, our ambassador in Washington, to launch an investigation into the attack and raise it with the White House. Amelia Brace, the reporter in the middle of that, is in Washington DC again for us tonight, so let's go straight to you. Amelia, good evening. Now, obviously, vision of that has gone around the world. No doubt you have a few bruises. You were the collateral damage for a presidential photo opportunity stunt, a peaceful protest that then suddenly got out of hand. The reaction, Amelia, what have you been receiving? What have people been saying to you?
Well, Michael, firstly, it's been, I guess, really humbling for my cameraman Tim Myers and I to hear from people really around the world with their concern about what happened to us. But it's also an important opportunity, I think, to highlight the brutality that is happening in the United States at the moment. What happened yesterday should have been a story even if we weren't caught in the middle of it. And that's because these people were legally and peacefully protesting half an hour before that curfew came into place. They had no reason to expect the police to come in at all, let alone with that sort of force. And then later to find out that it was all to clear the way for Donald Trump to walk out and pose with that Bible was, I think, a very alarming moment. This happened in broad daylight out the front of the White House in a public park in the United States of America, which is meant to stand up for democracy, and that is not what we saw yesterday.
What's the feeling then, Amelia? The violence, is it continuing in DC today, or has it quietened a little?
It's still quite early in the morning here, and on the other days we haven't seen much action really until the afternoon. But I can tell you, security on the streets today is significant. Even late last night, when we were trying to move about outside our hotel, all showing our media credentials, we were stopped by the Secret Service and told that we were not allowed out on the streets. Again, that is something that is very alarming, for the media to not be allowed out to report on what is happening here. And right now I can tell you, I can see an FBI agent outside our hotel. I can see a Secret Service agent, and it just appears like every street is in lockdown. So it appears that they're trying to keep the city locked down today, even prior to the curfew coming to effect at 7 p.m.
Amelia, I'll read this to you because we received it tonight. The US Embassy in Canberra has tonight released a statement in response to that attack, the beating of you and Tim, your cameraman, saying freedom of the press is a right Australians and Americans hold dear. We take the mistreatment of journalists seriously, and going on to say we remain steadfast in our commitment to protecting journalists and guaranteeing equal justice under law for all. I described that tonight as a statement, not really stating anything at all. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I guess it goes to what I said before, that this is about freedom of the press. So what happened to us, to me, is just as alarming as being told by a Secret Service agent that we can't walk down the street to report on what is happening. And the protection of the media is not because we're more important or more privileged or more special than anyone. It's because we are everyone, and we need to be in there. We need to be in between the police and the protesters, which is where we were, so we can tell both sides of the story. And if we can't do that safely, then the story won't be told. And that is when people and democracy suffers.
Indeed. All right. Amelia Brace in Washington DC. To you and Tim the cameraman, thank you. Meantime, a TV reporter in Seattle was hit by a flashbang grenade live on air as police moved in on what had previously been a peaceful protest. Have a look.
Hey guys, we're in the Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle right now. I don't know if you can hear me, but we have police now advancing on protesters. Oh my gosh, we're moving.
Oh.
We're moving. We're moving.
Okay.
Okay, you're good.
Go this way. Go this way. Go this way.
Let's go.
Yeah, look. Look, a lot of media caught up in all of it. Now, under strict curfew, protests have been noticeably less violent across Minneapolis, which is good news, despite tensions flaring across the rest of the United States. NBC correspondent Jay Gray is there for us tonight. Well, Jay, thank you for joining the latest firstly. Now, what is the situation there now? You are at where it all began, so what's the latest there?
Yeah, and Michael, still an uneasy tension across this city and across much of the country. I want to give you a look at the first police precinct. We're in downtown Minneapolis. You can see it almost looks like a military outpost here. You've got heavy barricades. You've got the National Guard on standby with the vehicle there. Locked down here. And this is the scene playing out across this city, across much of the country right now. We had another night of protest, the 7th night since George Floyd was killed, and the 7th night of protests. They were, for the most part, peaceful last night. No real substantial violence. There were still plenty of arrests, but most of those for violating the curfew here. And that seems to be a trend. Over the last 2 evenings, we've had relatively calm protesting here. Now, there's one area where the protest stop and where they allow people to stay long after the curfew, and that's the area where Floyd died. It's turned into a huge memorial visited by his brother yesterday. Just an emotional time there where he pled with not only people here but the nation to remain peaceful and to push forward with the message that they'd like to change policing practices across this country.
Yeah, let's pause, Jay, and have a listen to what he had to say.
My family is a peaceful family. My family is God-fearing. If I'm not over here messing up my community, then what are y'all doing? What are y'all doing? Y'all doing nothing. Because that's not going to bring my brother back at all.
Yeah, Jay, that was so strong. Have his pleas, has his message been received loud and clear or not?
I know here it has. There were, hundreds of people, maybe 1,000 that were there at the time, but then so many sharing that message that was, like you said, so strong. And to see him deliver that after barely being able to walk into the area where his brother was killed, to summon that strength was really just amazing to be there. But yeah, a lot of people here, and they've been saying this for the last couple of days, Michael, they feel like the violence is taking away from their message, and so they're encouraged by the last 2 nights here.
Yeah. Jay, we appreciate you joining us again. Thank you. For the first time since the 1940s, a curfew has been placed on New York City overnight after days of violence and looting across Manhattan. CNN correspondent Bryn Gingras joins me from the streets there now. Well, Bryn, the curfew didn't prevent it from turning into another night of destruction on the streets of New York. Tell us, what is the situation there right now?
Yeah, Michael, even at this hour, 8 a.m. Eastern time here in New York City, there are still arrests happening. More than 200 arrests so far overnight, and we're hearing that number is just going to go up as people are continuing to be processed. Now, a majority of those arrests were happening right here in this borough, Manhattan, and a lot of them in areas that are very high profile for this city, like where we are right now in Herald Square. You can see that window was shattered, but also this is the flagship Macy's store in Herald Square, and you can see it's all boarded up. It's been boarded up for several days now, but even still, looters were able to break down those boards and get into the store. We've heard from the NYPD here that at least 5 people were arrested inside. There also was a lot of violence, Michael, against police. There was an officer who was hit by a hit and run who's in the hospital right now in serious condition with a head injury. I'm told from people that I've talked to, sources, that there were bricks and other materials falling onto them from high rises. It just got incredibly violent overnight here in New York City, as it was the night before. And unfortunately, that curfew, it started at 11 o'clock last night, 8 o'clock tonight. Hopefully that'll be more of a deterrent, but we'll have to see, Michael.
You know, Brennan, it's extraordinary. We've been watching New York for weeks now, being affected so badly by COVID and the curfews associated with that, and now this violence. Give me a sense of that feeling.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it feels like people have just forgotten about COVID, to be honest. I mean, you are seeing protesters, legitimate protesters out there with masks on, but they're certainly not social distancing. And we're just about a week away from reopening New York City. It's the only section of New York State that hasn't opened anything since the coronavirus broke out. And that's expected to happen next week, but it's unclear if it will because of all these protests that were happening. Something, Michael, I really want to make clear is that what the NYPD is seeing is that among these legitimate protesters, there are people who have organized crime, essentially. We're hearing that basically what they do is they are with the group, but then they break off into separate groups where police have to follow them. And they continue to break off into these smaller groups until basically they're not being followed by police anymore. And that's when the criminal activity starts. That's when the looting starts. So it's almost impossible to catch. And really, that's what we were seeing the night before, was like this game of catch and mouse where one store would be broken into and then another, police would respond, and then they would go to a different part of the city. And it's unfortunately almost impossible to catch, even with a boost in the number of police officers on the streets.
Makes it really hard. All right, good to talk to you again. Bridget Grass in New York, thank you.